nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for our Week in Review. The three men who are facing charges of mischief over $5,000 for their alleged involvement in the Coutts border blockade earlier this year were back in court Friday morning. Court appearances for the defendants have drawn large crowds of supporters. Lethbridge police were warning of potential traffic congestion as a convoy of vehicles arrived to support Alex Van Herk, George Jansen, and Fort Macleod Town Councillor Marco Van Hugenbos. BCN's Naveen Day was on the scene Friday morning to hear from those involved. Organizer Benita Peterson says faith plays a vital role in swaying the Crown's stance on the matter.
Such a great crowd here today, lots of cheering, lots of shouts of freedom. And so we're here today to show our support of these individuals. And we're also here today, in a sense, to express that we are opposed to the charges that have been issued to them in September.
Now, I've been told that this has been adjourned to December 12th. What are you hoping for there to be a resolution in all of this?
This is my personal hope, and I've been praying for this. My personal hope is that the Crown prosecutor will observe the crowd from today and get a sense of the amount of support these three men have, and that the Crown prosecutor will decide that it is not in the public interest to prosecute, and my hope is the charges will be withdrawn.
So do you feel gatherings like this can put pressure on Crowns to sway like what they may want to deal with?
I think it's possible. Now, I'm a person of faith, so that's one of the reasons I believe that. When we come together in love and we pray together like we did today, even the singing of O Canada today with the first and the fourth verse is a form of prayer. We're saying, God bless our land, God keep us glorious and free. And that has a power, that has an energy. And so it influences everyone here, but it influences people who watch online or through media. I think it can influence the Crown prosecutor as well.
The matter was adjourned until December the 12th. Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara Leach of Medicine Hat, Alberta, wrapped up her two-day testimony at the Public Order Emergency Commission in Ottawa. She told the inquiry that she joined the Freedom Convoy after failing to get a response from members of Parliament that she contacted about ending COVID-19 restrictions. Leach says the goal of the convoy was to fight for Canadians' freedoms and not to promote harmful media.
No hateful rhetoric. We didn't want any sort of divisive rhetoric. Just again, it goes back to point 3, be respectful. We didn't, I was on lives daily saying that we are going to Ottawa to peacefully protest and exercise our democratic right to assembly. We are not going there to create problems and, I said if you see anyone that's acting in a threatening manner or an aggressive manner, to get their license plates, phone the police and report it, or contact us and we could report it. We just didn't want any of that type of behavior happening here because that was never what it was about.
In other news, Calgary pastor Tim Stevens from Fairview Baptist Church, who was charged with violating public health orders of physical distancing during the COVID pandemic, was acquitted in Alberta Provincial Court this past Monday. In a statement, the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, which represented Stevens, said, quote, Pastor Stevens was illegally arrested and imprisoned for 21 days for allegedly violating public health orders, which have been shown to be ineffective and harmful. This decision sets the record straight about the justifiability of his actions and about the importance of respecting charter rights and freedoms, end quote. The Royal Canadian Legion announced this year's National Silver Cross Mother is Candy Greff of Lacombe, Alberta. She will have the honor of placing a wreath at the National War Memorial in Ottawa on Remembrance Day. Greff will remain in her national role until October of next year. Her son, Master Corporal Brian Greff, was a member of the 3rd Battalion of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry based in Edmonton. He was a highly skilled soldier who tragically lost his life in Afghanistan on October 29th of 2011. He was riding inside an armored NATO bus when a suicide bomber detonated an explosives-filled car, which impacted the bus. The National Silver Cross Mother acts on behalf of all Canadian moms who have lost a son or daughter in the line of service. After the break, Alberta's opposition party cuts ties with one of its candidates over some bad tweets, and a record snowfall opens Alberta ski resorts a week early. Keep it right here. Crews were busy clearing snow and ice from roads in much of the province after a storm swept across Alberta on Wednesday. In Edmonton, the season's first snowfall in the city caused nearly 400 crashes after the warmest October on record. It was almost the same situation in southern Alberta and other parts of the province. Calgary was reporting more than 230 collisions, including 22 hit and runs. Police say some of the most dangerous areas include bridge decks, off-ramps, and major intersections where black ice can accumulate. And speaking of snow, due to the autumn snowfall in the Alberta Rockies, the Banff ski resorts have opened early. All the extra flurries made Sunshine Village the first resort to open for the season in all of Canada. November 3rd marked its earliest opening in 37 years. Lake Louise started its lifts operating on November 4th. Lake Louise has received 51 centimeters of pure Alberta snow over the past week. Sunshine received at least 77 centimeters of snow since Friday of last week, and the ski hill expects 22 centimeters of snow between Saturday and Sunday of this weekend. Typically at Sunshine Village during the first week of November, it gets 15 centimeters of the white stuff. Snow will continue to fall through November as the Alberta ski season gets underway. The 5 candidates running for the Alberta constituency of Brooks Medicine Hat, including the new premier, squared off in a debate Tuesday night. The debate on education was held in Brooks, Alberta, and much of the talk was about funding and how each party would support schools after a difficult 3 years during the COVID-19 pandemic. Premier Danielle Smith is trying to win a seat in the legislature in that constituency, where advanced voting has already started and the by-election will be held next Tuesday, November 8th. Meanwhile, Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, says that road to November 8th for Danielle Smith will not be as easy as some might think.
This is probably a relatively safe spot for Danielle Smith to be running, certainly compared to the other option that was before her, which is the riding of Calgary Elbow. But she's running against someone who's pretty well known in the area. And she's running, and Barrymore Sheed, of course, the Alberta Party, is not a super left-wing party, running to the left of Danielle Smith, certainly, and the UCP, certainly, but not a New Democrat. So do I think Danielle Smith's going to lose? No, I don't. I think she'll probably take her seat in the legislature.
We'll hear more from Tyler Dawson coming up later on in the show. Alberta's NDP opposition has cut ties with its candidate in the electoral district of Calgary, Klein, over statements made on Twitter. The party says Marilyn North Pigon's comments undermine her ability to work with or stand on behalf of the Alberta NDP and its members. The Twitter comments, which have since been deleted, took aim at Calgary City Councillor Dan McLean and Jonathan Dennis, a former Alberta Justice Minister, over racist videos to which they have been linked. In her tweets, North Pigon criticized both men, McLean's family, and the Calgary Stampede Board of Directors, and she has since apologized. Alberta's NDP are calling on the United Conservative government to launch an investigation into the high cost of grocery prices. Agriculture and forestry critic Heather Sweet says large grocery chains are reporting record profits and should be investigated for price gouging and inflation profiteering. She was joined by community and social services critic Marie Renaud, who is urging the government to return to the legislature.
Last month, we saw the overall inflation started to cool, but food prices continue to increase more than 10% month over month.
We could lower income tax, we could raise benefits, we could increase grants to nonprofits, we could build affordable housing, we could increase rebates, we could freeze tuition.
British Columbia has announced a new pay deal for doctors, and Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley says Danielle Smith's government needs to take urgent action to keep family doctors from leaving the province. The BC government announced an agreement with doctors that will significantly increase their compensation to about $385,000 a year, up from the current $250,000.
Smith has promised that the first 90 days of her healthcare plan will be quote-unquote bumpy. And I would argue that this government and many of the people sitting in her new cabinet have already run our healthcare system not onto a bumpy road, but right off the road. Smith leans on conspiracy theories about health and medicine, ignoring the advice of Alberta healthcare workers, which has damaged even further this government's relationship with healthcare workers. Smith blamed healthcare workers for manufacturing what she claimed to be non-existent staff shortages. Imagine that. Making claims as ridiculous and unfounded as this after all of the horrific stories that we have actually seen unfold in front of us.
On September 29th, Alberta doctors voted 70% in favor of a new $250 million four-year deal. Stay with us. We have more coming up after the break. While the battle between the NDP and the UCP heats up, Albertans' focus is elsewhere. Recently, Hal Roberts sat down with Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas to talk about the hearings as well as gun control, crime, and the changing spaces for the homeless in our area and the charitable groups striving to help this part of our community. Have a look.
Now, how do you see it, Rachel? Was the federal government correct in invoking the act last February during the Freedom Convoy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, at the end of the day, there's a very high bar that is set in order for the Emergencies Act to be justified. And what that means is that, it's reserved for the most serious circumstances. Circumstances, where regular legal powers would not be able to resolve the issue at hand. And so ultimately now with the public inquiry, it is going to be determined through this process as to whether or not that high bar was really met. So, I'm going to watch that unfold, but I would say that based on my observations, these were law-abiding citizens who were, protesting on Parliament Hill, wanting to make their voices heard. Certainly, they felt ignored, they felt silenced, they felt scapegoated. Yes, there was some discomfort around it for folks, but really, this is not a question about discomfort. This is a question about whether or not other legal means could have been used to resolve this issue.
Ottawa brought forth their legislation putting a freeze on handguns. They say it will really curtail gun violence and keep our streets safer in Canada. But let me ask you something. How do you see it?
Well, interestingly enough, despite all of their efforts, despite all of the firearms legislation that has been put in place by this government, since the Liberals took the helm in 2015, gun violence has skyrocketed. It has dramatically increased in this country. That should be very telling. For me, and for many experts who are looking at this is the conclusion. The conclusion is that this government is more interested in going after individuals who own their firearms legally, use their firearms legally, abide by the law, keep the peace. They're responsible citizens. Those are the people that the government is choosing to go after. Well, we know that's not going to make a difference. It's just going to make their lives difficult. But meanwhile, gangs and illegal trafficking of firearms, those are two problems that are not being tackled by this government. And so those problems will continue to perpetuate. And that's exactly what we're seeing because we're watching as crime is going through the roof. Now, what I find interesting is that while this government is putting a freeze on handguns, they are simultaneously moving Bill C-5. Bill C-5 actually rewards criminals. It actually takes away minimum sentences for those that would commit a crime using a firearm.
Now, Rachel, you have seen firsthand, because this is your home riding as well in Lethbridge, we still have serious drug, crime, and homeless issues in our city, especially with the tent encampments. The police have been tearing some of them down, but again, where are homeless going to go, right? Now, you as our MP, how are you working with our MLAs and Mayor Blaine Hagan to really address these very serious concerns in our city?
Mm-hmm. A really good question, Hal. And, this is a problem that we've faced for quite some time in our community, and we've tried, various ways of addressing it. I would say that right now, I'm watching as the situation is being exacerbated. one of the factors that is exacerbating it is actually the cost of living and affordability. Just in the last few months, I've had two different folks come into my office and share with me that one individual had to give up their place because they couldn't afford rent and now live in their car. Another couple came into my office and said they couldn't make their mortgage payments, and so they actually went to insolvency and then now live in a small RV. These are real stories. These are people in our community, and these folks went from having a home to now not having a home. If that continues, we will watch as homelessness continues to rise as well. That concerns me. But there are also the issues of mental health and addiction, and all of this needs to be addressed. And so, one of the ways we can do that is by working together with all three levels of government and community partners. And so, there has been a roundtable established, and we're meeting to talk about this issue and to figure out the next steps ahead. But I think there's also an important point to make, if I may just take a second, and that is this. Oftentimes, the good initiatives that are taking place are overshadowed by the growing problem. And I do recognize that the problem needs to be addressed.
When we return, will the election in Brooks Medicine Hat be a cakewalk? Maybe not. Stay with us. For Albertans, there is more than the May 2023 election to think about. Hal Roberts and our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson talked about a few items on Alberta's political checklist. Have a look.
Justice Minister Tyler Shandro is facing a disciplinary hearing from the Law Society of Alberta, and it stems back from an incident in which he confronted a doctor in his driveway when he was health minister a few years ago. Can you explain really what transpired?
Sure. So this was sort of during the relatively acrimonious contract negotiations between doctors and Alberta Health, if I remember correctly. And he had sort of gone over to this driveway, this doctor's driveway, and confronted him about some of this stuff. And the doctor, I guess, felt that this was sort of unbecoming conduct. And there's actually sort of two other allegations that are sort of floating around in the context of this stuff. One of them is that he used his position as Minister of Health to get personal phone numbers for staff and phone them outside of work hours. And the other one is that he sort of allegedly threatened to refer a woman to the authorities with whom he had a disagreement. So basically, the Law Society hearing is simply whether or not sort of he's brought the law profession into disrepute with these actions. And that hearing is going to be in late January. So there's actually a date set for that now. And I believe it had been rescheduled a week or two ago. And so we now know the date of when that's going to be dealt with, I suppose.
Tyler, the UCP is understanding how important it is for Calgary to get a new arena deal done. I mean, the Saddle Dome and all of its charm and character is almost 40 years old now, one of the oldest unrenovated arenas in the NHL. Now, Premier Smith said the province may actually get involved. What will that look like? Maybe extra taxpayers' dollars? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, it could. Pretty thin on the details at the moment, which, as I've sort of said a couple times, we're early days here, so that's not totally surprising. But the government has said, Smith posted a letter to social media on Tuesday, I think it was, basically saying that the government was going to get involved to sort of look at what they can do to make this deal happen. Certainly, one possibility would be some sort of putting up some sort of money to get involved, but we just don't know yet. But big news, I think, for the people of Calgary who had this deal fall apart. Must have been a couple years ago now. So we'll have to see. But this is, I think, one of the first sort of big moves maybe that Danielle Smith has made, and also notable because in order to win an election, this is taking a bird's eye view here. There's three constituencies in Alberta. You need rural Alberta, or Edmonton, or Calgary. You need two of the three. And at the moment, the UCP has one, and that's rural and small town Alberta. So they need to focus on Edmonton or Calgary, really. And so I think when you look at the arena stuff from the perspective of the electoral politics at play here, I think certainly making some waves in Calgary is going to be part of what we see the UCP do in the months ahead.
Tyler, opposition leader Rachel Notley and the NDP held their convention in Calgary recently. What was the main theme there?
Rachel Notley in her speech had sort of suggested that Smith was, fear-mongering about NDP socialism and stuff like that. But they're, trying to provide, a relatively mainstream, viable alternative to the United Conservatives. And so I think that it's fair to say that that's sort of the theme, that they are trying to project themselves as the government in waiting, the party of stability that does not have infighting, that will be focused on Albertans instead of infighting. That's sort of the message they've been hammering for some months now. And I think we're going to see that sort of continue in the weeks and months ahead. Notable that the UCP convention was in Edmonton and the NDP convention was in Calgary. And I think this, it has to do with the fact that the conventions have been flipped in years past. But also, again, this is an electoral politics thing. Both those parties need to think about how they're going to win the parts of Calgary that they need to in order to form a government in 6 months, 7 months' time.
Yeah, try and build up support. UCP in Edmonton, NDP in Calgary, absolutely. Tyler, the NDP adopted some notable policies, including lowering the voting age in Alberta to 16. Why do you think they're pushing for that? Are they thinking, you know what, if I'm old enough to drive a vehicle at 16, why not vote?
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. This debate has gone on at the federal level a little bit in the last year or so, and it hasn't gone anywhere. But I think from the NDP perspective, there's some sort of electoral genius there. When you look, it's sort of the old aphorism, that if you're not a liberal when you're 20, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative by 50, you have no brain, or whatever the specifics of it is. But I think probably the New Democrats are looking at some of the concerns of younger Albertans and some of the things that they are worried about, and education, for example, student loans, housing prices, those sorts of things, and are thinking, well, you know what, gosh, there's probably some electoral benefit to having 16-year-olds voting. There's also a principled argument for it, but that was certainly one of the things that made a bit of a splash coming out of the NDP convention.
We will keep you up to date next week on the election in Brooks Medicine Hat. And as usual, you can head over to our YouTube channel for any of our interviews. When we return, a look at the top local news of the week. Stay with us.
As the industry grows its footprint here in the province, we're also seeing local talent get opportunities internationally.
Police in Edmonton are investigating what they call a pink elephant theft, which is a nickname for the robbery of a piece of jewelry so large, who would possibly buy it? The hot rock in question, a 99-pound amethyst from a jewelry store. The geode, which is a spherical rock with a hollow cavity lined with crystals, is so large and distinct looking that the owner of Silver Anvil Rock and Gem wonders what the thieves hope to even do with it. A disability support worker in southern Alberta is frustrated about not seeing a wage increase in the last 8 years. Heather Lyons in Lethbridge says the lack of pay and staffing shortage is now having an effect on her clients.
Really affects our individuals. Our individuals, we're seeing a ton of anxiety and frustration and trust issues because they're having people come in and out of their lives like a revolving door. They just start. One of the big things with working in this field is building connections with others, building rapport. And how can you build that rapport when you're not sure who's going to be hanging out with you tomorrow morning?
Lyons says they would like to see a permanent change, including a pay increase along with more staff members. The cold and icy temperatures can make for some slick conditions on the roads. Folks at the AMA are offering some tips to make sure that you get to your destination safely. Some of those include having a good visibility and practicing safe braking techniques. Ryan Lamont says it's good to have these reminders, especially during major snowfall events.
So being focused on all those skills, those tasks, they are good principles that we tend to park them in spring when the roads start getting nicer, the sun's coming out, we've got traction and not having to worry about that. So all these winter skills that we spend these winter months developing, they kind of get parked away in spring. And so this first snowfall really prompts us to kind of dig back and pull those principles and skills out. But they're really important to keep in mind.
Lamont also says it's important to always drive with your lights on during the snowy and darker months and to always have good winter tires on your vehicle. Some good advice there. Well, we just got finished with Halloween, but with all this snowfall, it really is beginning to look a lot like Christmas instead. And this means that Operation Christmas Child is in full swing. Each year, Samaritan's Purse launches the initiative that becomes a huge blessing for many families around the world. It's when people put items in a shoebox, mainly for children in need. Jackie Cato with the organization says oftentimes these are the first gifts that certain kids have ever received.
For many of them, they have never received a gift of any kind in their lives. And now they're getting a whole box full of gifts. And many times in many different places, children have opened them trying to think, well, do I get to choose which one and what can I keep? And they're just amazed as to what happens when you can have all of it. And they're so astonished. It makes a difference for children who are going to school. Some children cannot go to school because they don't have the school supplies. Their parents can't afford it. Now they can go to school.
A new Kevin Costner movie is in production. The Western-themed film is called Horizon. It takes place during the pre- and post-Civil War expansion and settlement of the American West. A local Indigenous actor has recently joined the cast. Video journalist Micah Quinn has more on Owen Crowshoe and his journey to the top. Crowshoe said that he fell in love with acting after his dad brought him on the set of a TV series.
When I very first got on set, I was blown away by everything. I was like taking in everything that was around me.
Owen Crowshoe has a laundry list of acting credits on his resume. He has worked on The Revenant, Black Summer, Tin Star, and Joe Pickett, just to name a few. If that wasn't nearly enough, he has joined an ensemble cast of actors for the upcoming movie Horizon, which stars Kevin Costner, Sienna Miller, and Sam Worthington. Crowshoe is originally from Lethbridge and grew up on the Piikani Nation. He got his start in acting when he was just 20 years old.
My dad he kind of stepped up. He said, he was like, well, if you don't want to play football, he said you could come back home with me and I'm doing some horse riding on this show, Hell on Wheels. And I kind of thought about it. I was like, that sounds fun now. Like now at the stage of my life I was at, I was like, yeah, that sounds like something interesting.
Keep Alberta Rolling is a nonprofit organization that promotes the economic and community-oriented benefits of the big screen in Alberta. Brock Skredding, the head of advocacy with the group, says it's amazing to see actors from Alberta working in big blockbuster movies and putting our province on the map.
And it really shows how much talent we have in Southwest Alberta and how amazing it is to see as the industry grows its footprint here in the province. We're also seeing local talent get opportunities internationally and really share their talent with the world. So that's awesome to see.
Stay with us after the break. We hear more about the organization that brightens a youngster's Christmas.